The blood on Zara Whitley's hands wouldn't wash away, no matter how hard she scrubbed them in the creek. It wasn't real blood, not physically, but she felt it there all the same, the phantom stains of a desperate act that had bought her freedom. Behind her, the distant sound of hoofbeats haunted her dreams, though she knew they were only in her mind. For now, Montana Territory, 1876. The vast, unforgiving landscape stretched before her like an ocean of grass and stone. 3 days she'd been running, hiding during daylight and moving under the cover of darkness. Her feet were blistered, her fine silk dress, once the envy of every woman in Victor Blackstone's household, now torn and mudded beyond recognition. The fancy boots he'd made her wear were falling apart, designed for show rather than the 40 miles she'd traveled on foot. The autumn wind cut through her thin clothing as she huddled against a large rock, trying to catch her breath. She was 22 years old and had never been alone like this before, never had to survive by her own wits. Victor had made certain of that. "You belong to me, Zara," he had told her repeatedly over the 2 years she'd been in his household. "I paid good money for you, and I'll decide what you do and where you go." Her parents' debt had been the chain that bound her to him, a wealthy businessman who owned half the town of Silverton, including the bank that held her family's mortgage. When consumption had taken both her mother and father within weeks of each other, Victor had been quick to collect on his investment. Not as a servant or laborer, he had enough of those. No, Zara had been acquired as something between a companion and a possession, forced to play the role of the elegant lady at his side while enduring his cruel, controlling nature behind closed doors. Zara forced herself to her feet, wincing at the pain. She had to keep moving, if Victor found her. She shuddered at the thought. The night she'd escaped, she'd overheard him finalizing arrangements with a business associate, a man twice her age from back east. Victor had gambled away a substantial sum, and to clear his debt, he'd offered Zara as payment, like livestock, like she wasn't even human. That night, she'd waited until he passed out from whiskey, taken what little money she could find, and fled. She didn't know where she was going, only that it had to be far from Silverton and the man who believed he owned her. The sun was beginning to set when Zara spotted the thin trail of smoke rising above the trees in the distance. A homestead, perhaps, or a camp. Her stomach clenched with hunger. She hadn't eaten since the previous morning, when she'd finished the last of the bread she'd stolen from Victor's kitchen. The risk of approaching strangers was great, but the certainty of starvation if she didn't was greater. She moved slowly through the trees, her legs trembling with exhaustion. As she drew closer, she could make out a small camp, a fire, a coffee pot, and a man tending to a horse. Just one man, as far as she could tell. The scent of cooking meat made her dizzy with hunger. Zara hesitated at the edge of the clearing. The stranger had his back to her, busy with something at the fire. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the practical gear of a working cowboy: denim pants, a faded shirt, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. A rifle leaned against a nearby saddle. Perhaps she could steal some food while he wasn't looking. Perhaps a twig snapped beneath her foot, and the man spun around with startling speed, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. "Who's there?" His voice was deep, commanding. "Step out where I can see you." Zara froze, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Running now would only make things worse. Slowly she stepped into the firelight, her hands raised slightly to show she carried no weapon. The cowboy's eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance: the torn dress, the dirt-streaked face, the wild, tangled dark hair that had once been her pride. His gun hand relaxed, though he remained alert. "Madam," he said with a slight nod, "you look like you've had a rough time of it." His face was weathered by sun and wind, but not old, perhaps 30 or so. His eyes, which caught the firelight, were a clear blue that reminded her of the mountain lakes near her childhood home. A few days' growth of beard shadowed his jaw. Her voice came out as a croak, her throat dry from thirst and disuse. "I don't mean any harm." The man studied her a moment longer, then gestured to a log by the fire. "Sit down before you fall down. I've got coffee and rabbit stew." Zara hesitated, years of hard lessons making her wary of men's seemingly kind offers. Something in her expression must have communicated her fear because the cowboy stepped back, giving her more space. "Name's Blake Winters," he said. "I don't make war on women or children. You're safe here." "How do I know that?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. A corner of his mouth quirked up. "Fair question. You don't, but you look about ready to collapse, and I reckon whatever you're running from must be worse than taking a chance on a stranger's stew." He was right about that. Cautiously, Zara approached the fire and perched on the very edge of the log, ready to bolt if necessary. The warmth of the flames was heavenly after so many cold nights. Blake handed her a tin cup of water first, which she drank greedily, then filled a battered metal plate with stew from the pot bubbling over the fire. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the food with trembling hands. "Eat slow," he advised. "Too much too fast will make you sick." She nodded and forced herself to take small bites, though she wanted to devour it all at once. The stew was simple rabbit, potatoes, and a few wild onions, but it was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. Blake busied himself with his horse, giving her space to eat. Only when she'd finished did he return to the fire, pouring coffee for them both. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated, then decided there was little point in lying. Zara Whitley." "Where you headed, Miss Whitley?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Away." He nodded, seeming to accept this vague answer. "Someone after you." Zara stiffened, her fingers tightening around the tin cup. "Why would you ask that?" "Because people don't usually wander the wilderness alone in fancy dresses, no matter how torn up they might be now," Blake said mildly. "And because you've got the look of someone expecting trouble to catch up any minute." She stared into the fire, debating how much to reveal. This man had been kind, but he was still a stranger, and men in these parts often respected property rights more than a woman's freedom. "Yes," she finally said. "Someone is after me." Blake sipped his coffee. "Husband? No," the word came out sharper than she intended. "A man who thinks he owns me." Blake's expression hardened slightly. "Nobody owns another person, not since the war ended." "Tell that to Victor Blackstone," she said bitterly. "He believes he purchased me along with my parents' debt." Blake was quiet for a moment, studying her over the rim of his cup. "I'm headed to Aurora, over in Wyoming Territory, small cattle town where people mind their business." "You're welcome to ride along if you'd like." The offer took her by surprise. "Why would you help me?" he shrugged. "Been on my own a long time, know how it feels to need a helping hand and not find one." His eyes met her steadily. "I don't want anything from you if that's what you're worried about. Just offering safe passage to somewhere this Blackstone fellow might not look." Zara wanted to believe him. The alternative, continuing alone, exhausted and ill-equipped, was grim. But trust didn't come easily after what she'd been through. I need to think about it," Blake nodded. "Take your time, I'm leaving at first light." He stood up and grabbed a bedroll from beside his saddle. "You can have this tonight, I'll keep watch for a while." He tossed the bedroll toward her and moved to sit with his back against a tree, rifle across his knees, giving her the space nearest the fire. Zara wrapped herself in the rough blanket, inhaling the scents of horse, leather, and tobacco that clung to it. Despite her wariness, exhaustion overtook her quickly, and she fell into the deepest sleep she'd had since fleeing Silverton. She dreamed of running through endless forests, pursued by shadows with Victor Blackstone's cruel laugh. But whenever the shadows drew too near, a figure on horseback would appear, driving them back into the darkness. When dawn broke, Zara opened her eyes to find Blake already up, saddling his horse and packing his meager supplies. He'd let her sleep, made a decision. He asked, not looking up from his work. Zara got to her feet, wincing at her stiff muscles and blistered feet. The thought of walking another day was unbearable, and something about Blake Winters felt trustworthy. A gut instinct she couldn't explain. "I'll go with you to Aurora," she said. "If the offer still stands." Blake nodded. "It does." He glanced at her ruined shoes. "We'll need to find you some proper boots at the next settlement. Can't have you limping across half the territory." "I can pay," she said quickly, touching the small pouch of coins hidden in her dress. "For the boots and for my share of supplies." "We'll figure it all out as we go," he replied, finishing with the cinch on his saddle. He approached the fire, kicking dirt over the remains. One thing you should know, though, she tensed. Here it comes, she thought, the condition, the expectation. But Blake's expression remained steady, his eyes serious. If this man comes looking for you while you're with me, he won't find you easy to reclaim. No one will own you again, not while I draw breath. That's a promise. The simple, fierce declaration stunned her. Such promises were easily made, of course, and just as easily broken. But something in the quiet certainty of his voice made her believe him. "Thank you," she whispered. Blake gave a short nod, then whistled for his horse. "His name's Renegade," he said as the dun gelding ambled over. "He's steady enough for two until we can get you a mount of your own." He helped her up onto the saddle, then swung up behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance, despite the intimate arrangement. As they rode away from the camp, Zara felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. She was still running, still hunted, but for the first time since she'd fled Silverton, she wasn't alone. The morning light filtered through the pines as they rode, casting dappled shadows across the trail. Blake kept Renegade at an easy pace, mindful of the double burden. Though he maintained a careful distance behind her in the saddle, Zara was acutely aware of his presence, the solid warmth at her back, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "How far to Aurora?" she asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. 4 days, maybe 5, Blake replied. "Depends on the weather and if we run into any trouble." "What kind of trouble?" He was quiet for a moment. "Territory's getting more settled these days, but there's still plenty of folk who prefer to take what they want rather than earn it. Bandits, mostly. Some renegade Indians, though they generally keep to themselves if you do the same." Zara nodded, absorbing this. Any danger on the trail seemed preferable to what awaited her if Victor caught up with her. "There's a trading post about half a day's ride from here," Blake continued. "We can get supplies there and proper clothing for you." She glanced down at her ruined dress. "I must look a fright." "You look like someone who survived," Blake said simply. They rode in companionable silence for a while. The morning was cool but pleasant, the sky a clear, endless blue above the trees. Occasionally, Blake would point out landmarks or wildlife, a hawk circling overhead, the tracks of deer crossing their path, distant mountains that marked the border between territories. "How did you end up out here?" Zara asked eventually. "You don't strike me as someone who was born to this life," Blake chuckled softly. "What gave me away? The way you speak, your manners." "Observant," he remarked. "You're right, born in Boston to a shipping merchant, expected to follow in the family business." He paused. "War changed things, changed me. Couldn't go back to counting ledgers and attending dinner parties after what I'd seen." "You fought for the Union?" "Yes, cavalry. After it ended, I drifted west, worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the army." He shrugged. "Found I preferred wide, open spaces to city walls." Zara understood the sentiment. Even in her desperate circumstances, she couldn't deny the breathtaking beauty of the wilderness around them. There was a freedom here she'd never known in Silverton, where Victor's influence had permeated every corner of her existence. "And you?" Blake asked. "How did a young lady like yourself end up indebted to a man like Blackstone?" Zara tensed, the familiar shame and anger rising within her. But Blake had shared his story. She owed him at least some of hers. "My father was a doctor," she began. "A good one, but not a practical man when it came to money. When my mother fell ill with consumption, he spent everything we had trying experimental treatments. Nothing worked." She swallowed hard. He borrowed from Victor to keep trying, convinced the next remedy would save her. "I'm sorry," Blake said quietly. "When she died, my father, he lost his will to live, started drinking, couldn't work. The debt grew, then he caught the same illness." Zara blinked back tears. "Victor was there at his deathbed with papers for me to sign. Said he'd forgive the debt if I agreed to become his ward, as he called it. I was 19, alone, with no means to support myself." Blake's jaw tightened. "And this ward arrangement became ownership?" "Yes." Her voice was barely audible. "He controlled everything, what I wore, who I spoke to, where I went, said it was for my protection, but—" She shook her head. 2 years of that, and then I overheard him arranging to give me to another man to settle a gambling debt. That's when I ran." Blake was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but she could hear the anger beneath it. "Men like that aren't men at all," he said. "Just wolves in fine clothing." They reached the trading post by early afternoon, a sturdy log building with a small stable attached, situated at a crossroads between two rudimentary trails. A few horses were hitched outside, and smoke rose from the chimney. Blake dismounted and helped Zara down. Her legs were stiff and sore from the unaccustomed riding. "Stay close," he murmured as they approached the door. "Trading posts attract all sorts, no need to draw attention." Inside, the post was dimly lit and crowded with merchandise, barrels of flour and sugar, shelves of canned goods, tools hanging from hooks in the ceiling, and glass cases containing more valuable items like ammunition and tobacco. A couple of rough-looking men stood at a counter where a barrel of whiskey was tapped, while an older woman examined bolts of fabric in a corner. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles and a waxed mustache, looked up as they entered. His eyebrows raised slightly at Zara's disheveled appearance but quickly smoothed into a professional smile. "What can I help you folks with today?" Blake led Zara to a quieter corner of the store. "My sister here needs proper traveling clothes," he said smoothly. "Had a mishap crossing a river. Lost most of her things." Zara kept her eyes down, playing along with the fiction. Sister was safer than whatever other relationship might be assumed. The proprietor nodded sympathetically. "Got some ready-made dresses, though nothing fancy. Mrs. Miller over there might help you find something suitable, miss." The older woman by the fabrics looked up and, seeing Zara's condition, immediately came over with motherly concern. "Oh, you poor dear," she said. "Come with me, I'll help you find something decent," while Mrs. Miller helped Zara select a practical dress, sturdy boots, and other necessities. Blake gathered supplies: coffee, flour, bacon, ammunition, and other trail essentials. Zara changed in a small back room, emerging in a simple brown calico dress that was plain but clean and whole. The boots were a bit large, but thick socks made them wearable. When it came time to pay, Zara insisted on using her own money for her items. Blake didn't argue, seeming to understand her need for independence, small though it was. As they were loading their purchases onto Renegade, the door of the trading post banged open, and the two men who had been drinking inside stumbled out. One of them, a tall man with a pockmarked face, squinted in their direction. "Well, ain't that a pretty sight?" he slurred. "New woman in these parts?" Blake stepped slightly in front of Zara. "We're just passing through," he said evenly. "No trouble needed." The second man, shorter but stockier, with a nasty scar across his cheek, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Didn't say nothing about trouble. Just being neighborly." His gaze slid to Zara, eyes narrowing. "Say, don't I know you from somewhere, girl?" Zara's blood ran cold. Had Victor already spread word about her, put out a reward? "I don't believe so," she said, keeping her voice steady. The scarred man frowned, trying to place her through his whiskey haze. "Could swear I've seen your face. Maybe in Silverton?" Blake finished securing their supplies and turned to face the men fully. His posture was relaxed, but Zara noticed his hand rested casually near his holster. "Like I said, we're just passing through," Blake repeated, "and we need to be on our way." The taller man stepped forward, swaying slightly. "Now hold on. Think there might be money in it if this here's the gal that banker fellow's looking for. Dark-haired girl, real pretty, run off with his valuables." Zara's heart hammered in her chest. She had taken money, yes, but nothing that could be called valuable, just enough to survive. Blake's expression didn't change, but something deadly entered his eyes. "This is my sister, gentlemen. We're headed to Aurora to meet our family. Now I suggest you both go back inside and have another drink on me." He flipped a coin toward the taller man, who caught it reflexively. For a tense moment, Zara thought the men might press the issue. But something in Blake's steady gaze, or perhaps the way his fingers now rested on his gun, made them reconsider. "No offense meant," the scarred man muttered, backing up a step. "Enjoy Aurora." Blake helped Zara mount Renegade, then swung up behind her. They rode away at a deliberate pace, not too fast to suggest fear, but quick enough to put distance between themselves and the trading post. "He recognized me," Zara said once they were safely away. Victor must have spread word about me. Or at least about a dark-haired woman who ran from him, Blake agreed grimly. We'll need to be more careful. Might be best to avoid settlements when we can. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've brought danger to you. Danger and I are old acquaintances, Blake replied. Besides, those two were just drunk enough to be suspicious, but not drunk enough to push their luck. They rode hard for several hours, Blake clearly wanting to put as much distance as possible between them and anyone who might connect Zara to the woman Victor was searching for. By dusk, they reached a small, sheltered valley with a creek running through it. We'll camp here, Blake decided. Good water, decent cover. As they set up camp, Zara found herself watching Blake with new eyes. The calm, lethal confidence he'd displayed at the trading post had revealed another dimension to the quiet cowboy. He wasn't just kind, he was dangerous when he needed to be. That night, as they sat by the fire eating a simple meal of beans and bacon, Zara finally asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. Why are you really helping me? Most men would have either turned me in for whatever reward Victor's offering or... She couldn't finish the thought. Blake was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Had a sister once, younger than me. After the war, when I was still finding my way, she got involved with a man like your Victor, wealthy, powerful, charming on the surface. His jaw tightened. By the time I found out how he treated her behind closed doors, it was too late. Zara's breath caught. What happened to her? Died trying to get away from him, Blake said simply. He claimed it was an accident. Law believed him because of who he was. I didn't, did you, confront him? Blake's eyes, reflecting the firelight, were distant with memory. I did more than confront him. That's why I keep moving. That's why I'm headed to Wyoming territory. He looked up at her then. So when I say no one will own you again, I mean it. Some debts can never be repaid, but helping you. Feels like something my sister would want me to do. The rawness of his confession hung in the air between them. Zara didn't know what to say, how to respond to such a painful truth shared so plainly. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you for telling me." Blake nodded once, then stood up. Get some sleep. I'll take first watch. As Zara lay wrapped in her blanket that night, she found herself studying Blake's silhouette against the starry sky. He was a man carrying his own ghosts, his own pain. Yet instead of hardening him, it had given him a fierce compassion she'd rarely encountered. For the first time since fleeing Silverton, Zara allowed herself to believe she might truly escape not just from Victor, but from the life of subjugation he had forced upon her. The road ahead would be dangerous, but she was no longer walking it alone. Dawn broke with a heavy mist clinging to the valley floor. Zara woke to the smell of coffee boiling over a small fire. Blake was already up, as usual, checking Renegade's tack while water heated for their breakfast. Morning, he said, noticing her stirring. Sleep well, better than I expected, she admitted, sitting up and combing her fingers through her tangled hair. With the new dress and a night's rest, Zara felt almost human again, despite the circumstances. Blake handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee. We've got a long ride ahead. Those men at the trading post concern me. Do you think they'll follow us? Not them specifically. But if they connect you to the woman Blackstone's looking for, word will spread. He frowned. We need to make better time, and that means finding you your own horse. Zara sipped her coffee, considering this. Where would we get one out here? There's a ranch about half a day's ride from here. Man named Thompson runs it. Decent sort, raised good horses. I've done business with him before. They ate a quick breakfast of leftover bacon and hardtack, then broke camp efficiently. As they rode, Blake kept them to the trees and high ground when possible, clearly choosing routes that would make them harder to track. The landscape began to change as they traveled, the dense pine forests gradually giving way to more open country rolling hills covered in sagebrush and grass that rippled like water in the breeze. Mountains loomed blue in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped despite the season. Beautiful, Zara murmured, taking in the vista. Different kind of beautiful than you're used to, I expect, Blake replied. I grew up in Colorado, she said. My father moved us there from Philadelphia when I was a child. He believed the mountain air would be good for my mother's health. She gave a sad smile. The irony is, I think she lived longer there than she might have elsewhere, just not long enough. They reached Thompson's ranch by midday, a sprawling operation with a substantial log house, several outbuildings, and large corrals containing horses of various colors and breeds. A tall, lean man with a gray-streaked beard emerged from the barn as they approached, shading his eyes against the sun. "Blake Winters," he called out. "Been a few years." Blake dismounted and extended his hand. "Good to see you, Thompson. How's business?" "Can't complain. Army contracts keep us busy." Thompson glanced curiously at Zara, who remained seated on Renegade. "This is Miss Whitley," Blake said. "We're traveling to Aurora, and she's in need of a good mount. Thought of you immediately." Thompson nodded politely to Zara. "Madam, any friend of Blake's is welcome here. Come on in, both of you. Martha will have lunch ready, and you can tell me what kind of horse you're looking for." Inside the ranch house, they were greeted by Mrs. Thompson, a robust woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands who insisted they eat before any business was discussed. The meal was simple but abundant: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread still warm from the oven. Zara hadn't eaten so well in days, and she had to remind herself not to devour everything too quickly. After lunch, Thompson led them to the corrals where several horses were being worked by ranch hands. "What kind of riding experience do you have, Miss Whitley?" Thompson asked as they leaned on the fence rail. "Some," Zara replied. "My father kept horses when I was younger, though it's been a while since I've ridden regularly." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "Then you'll want something steady but with enough spirit to keep up with Blake's Renegade." He whistled to one of the hands. "Bring out the bay mare." A beautiful horse was led from the barn, deep red-brown in color with black mane and tail and a single white sock on her right foreleg. "This here's Ember," Thompson said. 5 years old, well-trained, good endurance. Not skittish, but not lazy either." Zara approached the fence, and the mare came over, extending her velvety nose for inspection. Something about the horse's intelligent, gentle eyes spoke to Zara immediately. "She's perfect," she said softly. Blake examined the mare with a critical eye. "Solid animal," he agreed. "What's your price, Thompson?" The rancher named a figure that made Zara's eyes widen. It would take nearly all the money she had left. But a good horse was essential if they were to outpace any pursuit, and freedom, she was learning, came at a cost. "I'll take her," she said firmly. While Thompson's men prepared Ember with a saddle and gear appropriate for trail riding, Blake and the rancher stepped aside for a private conversation. Zara couldn't hear what they were discussing, but she noticed Blake hand over some money in addition to what she had paid for the horse. When they were ready to depart, Thompson pulled Blake aside once more. "Word is there's trouble brewing north of here," he said in a low voice that Zara barely caught. "Some fellow from Silverton's got men looking for a runaway woman, offering good money." Blake's expression didn't change. "Appreciate the warning, we'll be careful." Thompson studied Zara for a moment, then looked back at Blake. "Your business is your own, but if you need a place to lie low for a spell, my line cabin up by Broken Ridge is empty this time of year. Keys under the south corner stone." "Much obliged," Blake replied with a nod. They rode away from the ranch at a steady pace, Zara getting accustomed to Ember's gait. The mare was responsive and smooth-gaited, just as Thompson had promised. "What else did you buy back there?" Zara asked once they were well away from the ranch. "I saw you paying for something." "Rifle for you," Blake said, nodding toward the scabbard now attached to Ember's saddle, "and lessons in how to use it properly." Zara glanced at the weapon, a Winchester repeating rifle similar to Blake's own. "You think I'll need it?" "Hope not, but hope isn't a strategy." He looked over at her, his expression serious. "Thompson confirmed what we suspected. Blackstone has hired men to look for you. We need to be prepared." A chill ran through Zara despite the afternoon warmth. "How many men?" "Enough to make it worth changing our route," Blake replied grimly. "We'll head for Thompson's line cabin tonight. Get you comfortable with that rifle, then cut across to Aurora through the high country. Longer, but less chance of running into Blackstone's men." They rode hard for the remainder of the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold meal from their saddlebags. By sunset, They had reached the foothills of the mountains Thompson had mentioned. The line cabin was small but sturdy, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow bed pushed against one wall. Blake quickly got a fire going while Zara tended to the horses, unsaddling them and ensuring they had water from the nearby stream. "It's not much," Blake said when she returned inside, "but it's secure and off the main trails." Zara looked around the sparse cabin. Compared to Victor's opulent house in Silverton, it was nothing, yet she felt safer here than she ever had there. "It's perfect," she said honestly. They shared a simple meal of jerky, beans, and coffee. Afterward, Blake took out the rifle he'd purchased for her. "First rule," he said, checking that it was unloaded before handing it to her, "is that you never point this at anything you don't intend to shoot." For the next hour, he patiently taught her the basics of handling the weapon, how to load it, aim, manage the recoil. Zara proved a quick study, her hands steady despite the weapon's unfamiliarity. "Tomorrow we'll practice with actual firing," Blake said finally, "but that's enough for tonight." He insisted she take the bed while he spread his bedroll near the door. As she lay in the darkness listening to the crackling fire, Zara found herself studying Blake's profile, illuminated by the fading firelight. He was a contradiction, gentle yet dangerous, refined yet rugged. The man who had taught her to load a rifle with the same careful patience he might use to teach a child to read. The man who had promised that no one would own her again. For the first time in years, Zara felt something like hope unfurling within her chest. Not just for survival, but for a life beyond running, a life where she might be truly free. She fell asleep to the sound of Blake softly humming a tune she didn't recognize, the melody following her into dreams that, for once, contained no shadows. Morning dawned clear and crisp at the cabin. Zara woke to find Blake already outside, tending to the horses. Through the small window, she could see him running his hands over Renegade's legs, checking for any signs of strain from yesterday's hard ride. The domesticity of the moment struck her, how quickly they had fallen into a rhythm together, each handling their share of tasks without discussion. It felt natural in a way her life with Victor never had, where every action was scrutinized and controlled. Zara splashed cold water on her face from the basin by the door and smoothed her hair as best she could. The practical dress from the trading post had served her well, though she made a mental note to wash it at the first opportunity. Outside, the mountain air was sharp and invigorating. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pines, with a spectacular view of the valley below. In the distance, Zara could see the smoke from what must be Thompson's main ranch. "Sleep well?" Blake asked as she approached. "Better than I have in years," she admitted. "Something about mountain air," he smiled slightly, the expression softening his weathered features. "There's coffee on the fire. Thought we'd have a quick breakfast, then work on your shooting before we move on." After a breakfast of coffee and leftover biscuits, Blake led her to a small clearing about 100 yards from the cabin. He set up several cans on a fallen log, then handed Zara the Winchester. "Remember what we practiced last night," he said, standing close behind her. "Breathe steady, squeeze, don't pull." Zara raised the rifle, trying to recall everything he'd taught her about stance and aim. The first shot went wide, the recoil stronger than she'd expected. The second clipped the edge of a can, sending it spinning. "Good," Blake encouraged. "Now adjust your aim a little to the right." The third shot connected solidly, the can flying off the log with a satisfying ping. "I did it," Zara exclaimed, surprised by her own success. "You've got a natural eye," Blake said approvingly. "Let's try a few more." They spent an hour practicing, Zara growing more confident with each shot. By the end, she could hit the targets consistently, though not with Blake's speed or precision. "Not bad for a first lesson," he said as they walked back to the cabin. "With practice, you'll be able to handle yourself if needed." "I never thought I'd learn to shoot," Zara mused. "Victor believed women shouldn't handle firearms, said it wasn't ladylike," Blake snorted. "Being helpless isn't ladylike either, it's just convenient for men like him." They packed up their meager belongings and prepared to leave the safety of the cabin. According to Blake, they would follow a high mountain trail for 2 days, then descend into the valley that would lead them to Aurora. It would add time to their journey, but decrease the chances of encountering Blackstone's men. As they rode away from the cabin, Zara found herself reflecting on how much had changed in just a few days. The woman who had fled Silverton in terror, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate hope for freedom, now rode her own horse with a rifle at her side and a growing confidence in her ability to survive. They traveled steadily through the day, the trail growing steeper and more rugged as they ascended into the mountains. Ember proved her worth, picking her way carefully over rocky terrain without faltering. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a high meadow dotted with wildflowers, a perfect spot to rest the horses. As they dismounted, Blake suddenly tensed, his hand going to his revolver. "What is it?" Zara whispered, alarmed by his sudden vigilance. "Not sure," he murmured. "Thought I saw movement in those trees." They stood motionless, listening intently. The mountain was quiet except for the soft whisper of wind through the pines and the occasional call of a bird. Just as Zara was beginning to think Blake had imagined it, a voice called out from the tree line. "That's far enough, folks." 3 riders emerged from the forest, fanning out to block the trail ahead. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and heavily armed. The leader, a burly man with a thick mustache and a scar running through one eyebrow, urged his horse forward. "Looking for a dark-haired woman," he announced without preamble. "Ran away from her rightful guardian back in Silverton. There's good money for returning her safely." Blake positioned himself slightly in front of Zara, his posture casual but alert. "Can't help you there, friend. My wife and I are just headed to Aurora to visit her sister." The man's eyes narrowed as he studied Zara. "Funny thing, description matches her pretty close. Young, pretty, dark hair. Must be a common look," Blake replied evenly. "Now, if you don't mind, we'd like to continue our journey before the weather turns." The leader exchanged glances with his companions, then focused back on Zara. "Madam, if you're being held against your will, you can speak freely. We're here to escort you safely back to Mr. Blackstone." Zara's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't know any Mr. Blackstone. As my husband said, we're traveling to Aurora to visit my sister." The leader's face hardened. "Mr. Blackstone said she might lie, said she stole from him too." He nodded to his companions, who spread out further, clearly preparing to surround them. "We're going to need you both to come with us to straighten this out." Blake's hand hadn't moved from his revolver. "That's not going to happen. 3 guns against 1, mister," the leader said. "Don't be foolish." Zara slowly reached for her rifle, trying not to draw attention to the movement. Blake had positioned himself to block the men's view of her actions. "Last chance to ride away," Blake said quietly. "This doesn't have to end badly." The leader laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "It's already ended. You're outnumbered." His hand moved to his holster. "Now drop your weapon and step aside from the woman." What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion and sound. The leader drew first, but Blake was faster, his revolver clearing leather in a smooth motion that spoke of years of practice. 2 shots cracked almost simultaneously. The leader jerked backward in his saddle as Blake's bullet found its mark, while his own shot went wide. Zara pulled her rifle free as the other 2 men opened fire. Blake dove for cover behind a boulder, returning fire with deadly precision. The second man fell from his horse with a cry of pain. The third man wheeled his horse around, firing wildly as he retreated toward the trees. Without thinking, Zara raised her rifle, steadied her breathing as Blake had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The shot caught the fleeing rider in the shoulder, toppling him from his mount. Silence fell over the meadow, broken only by the panicked whinnying of the bounty hunter's horses and the ringing in Zara's ears from the gunfire. Blake moved quickly, checking each of the fallen men. The leader was dead, a bullet through his chest. The second man was alive but badly wounded in the leg. The third, the one Zara had shot, sat clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face pale with shock and pain. "You shot me," he said incredulously, staring at Zara. "A woman shot me." "Be grateful she's a better shot than you," Blake replied coldly. He collected their weapons, then bound the wounds of the two survivors with strips torn from their own shirts. Turning to Zara, his expression softened with concern. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled as she lowered the rifle. "I shot a man," she whispered, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. "You defended yourself," Blake corrected gently. "These men came to drag you back to Blackstone. They would have used force if necessary." He was right, Zara knew, but the knowledge didn't entirely ease the sick feeling in her stomach. Blake secured the two wounded men to a tree with their own rope. "We can't stay here," he said. "There might be more of Blackstone's men in the area. What about them?" Zara asked, nodding toward the bounty hunters. "They'll live until someone finds them or they work themselves free," Blake said, "which gives us a head start, but we need to move quickly." They gathered their horses, which had fortunately not bolted during the gunfight, and continued along the mountain trail at a faster pace than before. Blake led them off the main path, following game trails and dry creek beds that would be harder to track. As they rode, the adrenaline of the confrontation gradually wore off, leaving Zara cold and shaky despite the afternoon sun. The image of the man falling from his horse, the look of shock on his face when her bullet struck him, kept replaying in her mind. "It gets easier," Blake said after a while, seeming to read her thoughts. "Not the act itself that should never be easy, but the understanding that sometimes there's no choice." "Is that how it was for you?" After the war, Blake's face grew distant. "War teaches you to kill without thinking too much about it. That's how you survive." He glanced at her, "But afterward, you have to find a way to live with what you've done, to separate the necessary from the senseless. And have you found a way to live with it?" He was silent for a long moment. "Still working on that part," he finally admitted. "But knowing you did what had to be done helps. And you did, Zara. Those men would have taken you back to Blackstone by force." They rode until dusk, covering many miles of difficult terrain. When they finally stopped to make camp, they chose a defensible position, a small hollow backed by steep rocks, with good visibility of the approaches. As they sat by a small, carefully banked fire, eating a cold supper to avoid the telltale smoke of cooking, Zara found herself watching Blake with new eyes. The quiet cowboy had transformed into a deadly gunfighter when danger threatened, moving with a speed and precision that could only come from grim experience. Yet after the violence had ended, he had been gentle again, binding the wounds of men who would have killed him, ensuring they would survive until help arrived. There was a core of decency in him that even years of violence hadn't erased. "Blake," she said softly, "thank you for saving my life today." He looked up from the fire, his blue eyes reflecting the flames. "You saved yourself, Zara. I just helped a bit." "No," she insisted, "not just today. From the moment you found me in the woods, you could have turned me away or handed me over to Blackstone for the reward. Instead, you've risked your life for me, a stranger." Blake was quiet for a moment. "Maybe at first you were a stranger, not anymore." The simple words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them seemed ready to acknowledge fully. Zara felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spread through her chest. "Get some rest," Blake said eventually. "I'll take first watch. We've got a hard ride ahead tomorrow." As Zara settled into her bedroll, she realized something had shifted between them today, not just because of the violence they had shared, but because of the trust that had deepened in its aftermath. Blake had seen her at her most vulnerable and her most fierce, and he was still there, keeping watch in the darkness. For the first time since she'd fled Silverton, Zara allowed herself to consider a future beyond mere survival, a future where she might not just be free from Victor, but free to build something new. Something of her own choosing. With that tentatively hopeful thought, she drifted into sleep, the Winchester rifle close at hand. The next morning dawned gray and threatening, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. Blake studied the sky with a frown as they prepared to break camp. "Storm coming," he observed. "We need to make it over the pass before it hits, or we'll be stuck up here." They rode hard through the morning, the trail growing steeper and more treacherous as they ascended. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. By midday, they had reached a narrow pass between two towering peaks, their gateway to the valley that would lead them to Aurora. "Almost there," Blake called over the rising wind. "Once we're through, it's downhill to the valley." The first drops of rain began to fall as they navigated the rocky passage, cold and stinging in the mountain air. Ember snorted nervously as thunder cracked overhead, but the mare kept her footing on the increasingly slippery path. They were halfway through the pass when disaster struck. A brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the mountainside, followed instantly by a deafening crack of thunder. Spooked, Ember reared, nearly unseating Zara. As the mare came down, her hoof slipped on the wet stone, sending her scrambling for purchase at the edge of the trail. "Zara!" Blake shouted, wheeling Renegade around, but it was too late. With a terrified whinny, Ember lost her footing entirely, sliding over the edge of the path with Zara still in the saddle. They tumbled down a steep scree slope in a shower of loose rock and dirt. Zara clung desperately to the saddle horn as they fell, trying to guide Ember away from the larger boulders. The world spun in a chaos of rain and stone until they finally came to rest at the bottom of the slope, some 30 feet below the trail. For a moment, Zara lay stunned, the breath knocked from her lungs. Then panic surged through her as she realized Ember was lying motionless beside her. "Ember," she gasped, scrambling to her feet despite the pain shooting through her right arm. "Please be alive." To her immense relief, the mare's sides were still moving with breath. As Zara approached, Ember lifted her head and whickered softly, clearly in pain but alive. "Don't move, girl," Zara soothed, running her hands carefully over the horse's legs and body, checking for injuries. She found what she feared. Ember's right foreleg was clearly broken, the bone visible through the skin in a compound fracture that made Zara's stomach turn. "Zara," Blake's voice called from above. He was making his way down the slope on foot, leading Renegade carefully behind him. "Are you hurt?" "I'm all right," she called back, though her arm throbbed painfully. "But Ember, her leg is broken." Blake reached them moments later, his face grim as he examined the injured horse. Rain poured down around them, soaking them to the skin as thunder continued to roll across the mountains. "Can we splint it?" Zara asked desperately. "Get her to a town with a veterinarian." Blake shook his head slowly. "Compound fracture like that, there's nothing to be done, Zara, not for a horse." The meaning behind his words sank in like a stone. "No," she whispered. "There must be something. The kindest thing we can do is end her suffering quickly," Blake said gently. "I'm sorry." Tears mixed with the rain on Zara's face as she knelt beside Ember's head, stroking the mare's velvety nose. The horse's dark eyes were wide with pain and fear. "I'm so sorry, girl," she whispered. "This is my fault." Blake placed a hand on her shoulder. "It was an accident, no one's fault." After a moment, Zara nodded, standing back as Blake drew his revolver. She turned away, unable to watch, flinching at the sharp report of the gun that was mercifully quick. Silence fell, broken only by the patter of rain and distant thunder. Zara stood with her back to Blake, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She had known Ember for only a short time, but the mare had carried her toward freedom, had been a symbol of her growing independence. Strong arms encircled her from behind, and Zara turned instinctively into Blake's embrace. He held her as she cried, saying nothing, simply offering the comfort of human contact in the face of loss. When her tears finally subsided, Blake stepped back, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "We need to get out of this storm," he said, "and that arm needs looking at." For the first time, Zara noticed the awkward angle at which she held her right arm. "I think it might be broken," she admitted. Blake examined it carefully. "Not broken, but badly sprained. We'll bind it once we're somewhere dry." He looked up at the trail above them. "Can you climb?" Zara nodded, wiping rain from her eyes. "I'll manage." They salvaged what they could from Ember's saddlebags, the rifle, ammunition, some food supplies, and Zara's few personal items, and transferred them to Renegade. Then, with Blake helping her over the more difficult sections, they slowly made their way back up to the trail. The storm was intensifying, lightning flashing across the sky with increasing frequency. It was too dangerous to continue through the exposed pass. "There's a hunter's cabin about a mile back," Blake shouted over the wind. "We'll shelter there until the storm passes." With Zara riding Renegade and Blake walking alongside, they retraced their steps through the driving rain. The cabin, when they reached it, proved to be little more than a crude shelter, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough plank floor, and a roof that leaked in several places. But it was out of the wind and mostly dry. Blake quickly got a fire started with the dry wood stacked inside while Zara stood shivering by the door, cradling her injured arm. "Let's get you out of those wet clothes," Blake said, digging through his saddlebags for a spare shirt. "You'll catch your death otherwise." Zara nodded, too cold and miserable to feel self-conscious. Blake turned his back, busying himself with the fire while she stripped off her sodden dress and undergarments, pulling on his offered shirt. It was enormous on her slender frame, falling almost to her knees, but it was dry and smelled of leather, tobacco, and something indefinably Blake. "Done," she stammered through chattering teeth. Blake turned, his expression softening at the sight of her. "Come by the fire," he urged, spreading his bedroll on the floor beside it. "I'll look at that arm." He examined her injury with gentle, capable hands, manipulating the joint carefully as Zara winced. "Definitely sprained," he concluded. "We'll bind it tightly to keep it stable." Using strips torn from a spare bandana, Blake fashioned a sling that held Zara's arm securely against her body. His fingers were deft and sure, moving with a practiced efficiency that spoke of experience with field injuries. "There," he said when he'd finished. "How does that feel?" "Better," Zara admitted. "Thank you." Blake nodded, then stood to remove his own wet clothing. Zara averted her eyes, giving him the same privacy he'd given her, though she couldn't help a quick glance as he pulled a dry shirt over his head. His torso was lean and muscled, marked with several scars that told their own stories of a hard life. Outside, the storm raged on, rain lashing against the cabin walls and roof. Inside, the fire crackled cheerfully, creating a small island of warmth and light. "What happens now?" Zara asked as they sat side by side near the flames, sharing jerky and hardtack from their supplies. "We wait out the storm," Blake replied. "Then continue to Aurora tomorrow. It's still about a day's ride once we get through the pass. And after Aurora." The question had been weighing on her mind for days. "Will we part ways then?" Blake was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "That depends," he finally said. "On what?" He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the firelight. "On what you want, Zara." The simple statement took her by surprise. For so long, what she wanted hadn't mattered. Victor had made all decisions for her: what she wore, where she went, who she spoke to. The concept of choice was still new, almost frightening in its vastness. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "Except to be free, to belong to no one but myself." Blake nodded slowly. "A worthy goal. What about you?" Zara asked. "What do you want?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Peace maybe, been running a long time from what happened with your sisters, with the man who hurt her." "Partly," Blake acknowledged. "Partly from the war, partly from myself." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks up the chimney. "Been thinking I might settle somewhere quiet, get a small spread, raise some horses. In Aurora, maybe, seems as good a place as any." They fell silent again, the crackling fire and drumming rain filling the space between them. Zara found her gaze drawn to Blake's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows as he stared into the flames. In just a few days, this man had become the center of her world: protector, teacher, companion, and something more, something she was only beginning to recognize. "Blake," she said softly. He turned to look at her, a question in his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Before she could lose her courage, Zara leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a gentle, hesitant kiss. For a heartbeat, Blake remained still, clearly surprised. Then his hand came up to cup her cheek, and he returned the kiss with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they parted, Blake's eyes searched hers, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. "Are you sure about this, Zara?" he asked quietly. "You've been through a lot. Feelings get confused when you're running for your life." "This is the one thing I am sure about," she replied with newfound certainty. Since the moment you said no one would own me again, I've felt safe with you, not because you're protecting me, but because you see me, really see me." Blake's expression softened. "How could anyone not see you, Zara Whitley? You're the bravest person I've ever met." She laughed softly at that. "Me, I was terrified when you found me. Courage isn't about not feeling fear," he said seriously. "It's about feeling it and moving forward anyway. You fled a man who treated you like property, survived alone in the wilderness, shot a bounty hunter to defend yourself. If that's not courage, I don't know what is." His words warmed something deep inside her, a spark of self-worth that Victor had systematically tried to extinguish. In Blake's eyes, she wasn't a possession or a prize to be won. She was a woman of value, of substance. Outside, the storm began to abate, the thunder growing more distant, the rain softening to a steady patter rather than a driving force. Inside, another kind of storm was brewing, one of awakening feelings and new possibilities. Blake's arm slipped around her shoulders, and Zara leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong beneath his shirt. "Get some rest," he murmured into her hair. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Wrapped in his warmth, with the fire crackling before them and the rain singing a lullaby on the cabin roof, Zara closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt not just safe, but at peace. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with Blake beside her, not as her owner or master, but as her equal, her companion. Perhaps even someday as something more. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden beam. Zara woke slowly, aware of a comforting warmth at her back. Blake, still sleeping beside her, one arm draped protectively across her waist. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the simple pleasure of human contact freely given and received. There was no demand in Blake's embrace, no sense of entitlement or possession, just the gentle assurance of his presence. Eventually, she slipped carefully from beneath his arm, trying not to wake him. Blake stirred slightly but didn't open his eyes, clearly exhausted from the previous day's exertions. Zara moved quietly to the cabin door and stepped outside. The mountain landscape glistened in the aftermath of the storm, wildflowers bending under the weight of raindrops that sparkled like diamonds in the morning light. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. In the distance, snow-capped peaks stood proudly against a sky of perfect blue. It was beautiful beyond words, this wild country that had both tested and liberated her. Zara took a deep breath, filling her lungs with mountain air, feeling more alive than she had in years. She heard the cabin door open behind her and turned to see Blake, his hair rumpled from sleep, watching her with a soft expression. "Good morning," he said. "It is, isn't it?" Zara replied, gesturing to the vista before them. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." Blake came to stand beside her, his gaze taking in the panorama. "Worth all the rain and thunder, I'd say." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, absorbing the peaceful morning. "How's the arm?" Blake asked eventually. Zara flexed it experimentally. "Sore, but better. I can use it if I'm careful." "Good. We should reach Aurora by nightfall if we make good time." They ate a quick breakfast, then prepared to continue their journey. Renegade seemed well rested and eager to move, perhaps sensing they were nearing the end of their arduous trek. With only one horse between them, they would have to ride double again. Blake helped Zara mount first, then swung up behind her. The trail through the pass was more treacherous after the storm, muddy and strewn with debris, but Renegade picked his way through it steadily. Once they crested the highest point, the land opened before them, a vast valley stretching toward distant plains, with a ribbon of river winding through it. "There," Blake said, pointing to a distant cluster of buildings where the river bent. "Aurora." Zara felt a surge of conflicting emotions at the sight of their destination, relief that the dangerous journey was nearly over, trepidation about what awaited her there, and a strange reluctance to end this time alone with Blake. They descended into the valley, following the trail as it wound down from the high country through forests of pine and aspen. By midday, they had reached the valley floor where the trail widened into a more established road. "We should be more cautious now," Blake advised. Blackstone might have men watching the approaches to town. They stuck to the trees when possible, avoiding the main road until they were within a mile of Aurora. As they drew closer, Zara could make out the details of the settlement, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the rooflines, corrals and stables on the outskirts. It wasn't large, perhaps 200 souls at most, but it looked prosperous enough. "What's the plan?" Zara asked as they paused in a stand of cottonwoods at the edge of town. "We'll go to a friend of mine first," Blake decided. "Samuel Jenkins runs the general store. He's a good man, discreet. He can put us up until we figure out our next move." They entered town as dusk was falling, when the streets were busy with people heading home or to the saloon for an evening drink. Blake kept his hat pulled low, Zara close beside him as they made their way to a large wooden building with Jenkins General Merchandise painted above the door. A bell jingled as they entered the store, which was empty of customers at this late hour. Behind the counter, a portly man with a neatly trimmed beard was tallying figures in a ledger. He looked up at the sound of the bell, his expression shifting from polite inquiry to surprise. "Blake Winters," he exclaimed. "As I live and breathe, thought you were headed to California last I heard." "Changed my mind," Blake replied with a smile, stepping forward to shake the man's hand. "Good to see you, Sam." Jenkins' gaze shifted to Zara, curiosity evident in his kind brown eyes. "And who might this young lady be?" "This is Miss Zara Whitley," Blake said. "Zara, Samuel Jenkins, an old friend from my army days." Jenkins bowed slightly. "A pleasure, Miss Whitley." He glanced between them, clearly noting Zara's worn appearance and Blake's protective stance beside her. "I take it this isn't just a social call." "Need a place to stay," Blake confirmed. "Somewhere private, and some information." Jenkins nodded, no questions asked. "Martha's just putting supper on. You both look like you could use a hot meal. Come on through to the back." He led them through a doorway behind the counter into living quarters that were surprisingly spacious and comfortable. A plump, gray-haired woman was setting a table in a cheerful kitchen that smelled of roasting chicken and fresh bread. "Martha," Jenkins called, "look who's blown in with the wind." Mrs. Jenkins turned, her face lighting up at the sight of Blake. "Well, I never, Blake Winters." She hurried over to embrace him, then stepped back to assess him with a mother's critical eye. "Too thin, as usual, and who's this lovely young woman?" Introductions were made again, and within minutes, Zara found herself seated at the Jenkinses' table, a plate piled high with food before her. The normalcy of it, a family dinner, conversation, laughter, felt almost surreal after days on the run. After supper, while Martha showed Zara to a guest room upstairs, Blake and Samuel retired to a small study off the main living area. Through the half-open door, Zara could hear their low voices as she descended the stairs after washing up. "Dangerous business, Blake," Jenkins was saying. "This Blackstone fellow sounds like bad news." "He is," Blake replied grimly, "but I've dealt with worse. And the girl, what's your plan there?" There was a pause before Blake answered. "That's up to her. I promised to get her to safety, nothing more." Zara's heart twinged at the careful neutrality in his voice. After last night, she had hoped, but perhaps she had misunderstood. Perhaps the connection she felt was one-sided, born of gratitude and the intensity of their shared journey. "Well, you're both welcome to stay as long as you need," Jenkins said. "Though I should warn you, Blackstone's reach extends even here. There was a fellow in town yesterday asking questions about a dark-haired young woman, offering good money for information." "Already," Blake sounded concerned. "We've barely stayed ahead of them. Telegraph lines move faster than horses," Jenkins pointed out. "If this Blackstone has connections, he could have alerts out all over the territory." Zara stepped into the doorway then, unable to remain silent any longer. Both men looked up, startled by her presence. "I can't stay here," she said quietly. "I'm putting you all in danger." "Nonsense," Jenkins replied firmly. "Blake's friends are our friends, and we don't take kindly to men who treat women as property in Aurora." Blake stood, crossing to Zara's side. "Sam's right. You're safer here than on the run. We just need to be cautious, keep you out of sight until we can figure out a more permanent solution. Permanent solution. The words echoed in Zara's mind. What would that look like? Where would she go? Who would she become now that she was free of Victor but bound by the constant need to hide? As if reading her thoughts, Blake added gently, "One day at a time, Zara. We've made it this far." Later, as Zara lay in the comfortable guest bed, the first real bed she'd slept in since fleeing Silverton, these questions continued to circle in her mind. Through the open window, she could hear the distant sounds of the town piano music from the saloon, occasional laughter, the bark of a dog. Normal sounds, everyday life continuing while her own hung in suspension. A soft knock at the door roused her from these thoughts. "Come in," she called softly. The door opened to reveal Blake, who had clearly also washed and changed. He wore a clean shirt, his hair still damp from washing, his face freshly shaved. He looked younger without the trail, dust, and stubble, more like the Boston merchant's son he had once been. "Just wanted to check on you," he said, lingering in the doorway. "Make sure you have everything you need." "I'm fine," Zara assured him. "The Jenkinses are very kind." "They are," Blake agreed. "Good people, you can trust them." Silence stretched between them, laden with unspoken thoughts and feelings. Finally, Zara gathered her courage. "What happens now, Blake, truly?" He stepped into the room, closing the door quietly behind him, and sat on the edge of a chair near the bed. "Jenkins has some ideas," he said. "There's a widow outside town looking for help with her ranch. It would be a safe place, away from prying eyes, while we sort things out more permanently." "And what about you?" Zara asked, the question that had been burning in her heart finally finding voice. "Where will you go?" Blake looked down at his hands for a moment, then met her gaze directly. "That depends on you, Zara." "Me, I meant what I said that night by the creek," he said quietly. "No one will own you again, not Blackstone, not any man, including me." He took a deep breath. "I care for you, more than I expected to, more than might be wise given the circumstances, but your freedom is what matters most. Whatever you decide to stay here to move on to. To allow me to remain in your life, it has to be your choice. Freely made." The sincerity in his eyes, the careful respect with which he offered his heart without demanding anything in return, moved Zara deeply. It was so different from Victor's possessive declarations, his insistence that he knew what was best for her. "What if my choice is you?" she whispered. "Not because you saved me or because I have nowhere else to go, but because in you, I've found something I never knew existed, a man who sees me as an equal, who values my strength as much as my vulnerability." Blake's expression softened, hope kindling in his blue eyes. "Is that truly what you want?" In answer, Zara rose from the bed and crossed to where he sat. Taking his face between her hands, she kissed him, not the hesitant kiss of the cabin, but one filled with certainty and promise. When they parted, Blake stood, drawing her gently into his arms. "I don't have much to offer," he said. "No fine house or fancy clothes, just a man trying to make peace with his past and build something worthwhile." "That's all I want," Zara replied. "A chance to build something to something that's mine by choice, not by force or necessity." He smiled then, a full, unguarded smile that transformed his weathered face. "Then we'll build it together," he promised, "one day at a time." As moonlight streamed through the window, painting silver patterns across the floor, they held each other close, two souls who had found in each other not possession but partnership, not ownership but belonging. Morning brought the sound of activity from the street below, wagons rolling by, shopkeepers opening their establishments, the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Zara woke feeling more rested than she had in weeks, despite the continued uncertainty of her situation. She dressed in clothes Martha Jenkins had provided, a simple but well-made blue calico dress, far more practical than anything Victor had ever allowed her to wear. The sprain in her arm was healing nicely, though it still ached when she moved too quickly. Downstairs, she found Blake and Samuel in deep conversation over breakfast, a map spread between them on the table. They looked up as she entered, Blake's face softening into a smile that made her heart flutter. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Sleep well." Better than I have in years, she admitted, taking a seat beside him. Martha immediately bustled over with a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits still warm from the oven. "Eat up, dear," the older woman urged. "You're far too thin." As Zara ate, Blake and Samuel resumed their discussion, now including her in their plans. "Sam's been telling me about a place just outside town," Blake explained. "The Mackenzie Widow's Ranch. She's getting on in years, can't manage it all herself since her husband passed." "Ellen Mackenzie is a good woman," Martha added, joining them at the table with her own cup of coffee. "Tough as nails, but fair. She's been looking for a capable couple to help run the place, with an eye toward selling it to them eventually when she's ready to move east to live with her daughter." "A couple," Zara repeated, glancing at Blake. He met her gaze steadily. "If that's something you'd consider, it would provide a good cover and a safe place to stay while we figure things out." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. To live openly with Blake, to work alongside him building something tangible, it was more than she had dared hope for when she fled Silverton. "I don't know the first thing about ranching," she admitted. Samuel chuckled. "Neither did Ellen when she and Robert first came out here 30 years ago. She learned, and so will you." "It would mean hard work," Blake cautioned. "Long days, tough conditions sometimes, very different from what you knew before." Zara thought of her life in Victor's house, the beautiful dresses, the fine food, the social events where she was displayed like a prized possession. "All of it a gilded cage. I'm not afraid of hard work," she said firmly. "As long as the fruits of that work are my own." Blake's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. "Then we'll go see Mrs. Mackenzie today." Samuel folded the map. "I'll make the introductions. Ellen trusts my judgment." He glanced at Zara. "But first, we need to make some arrangements for your safety. Blackstone's man has been asking around town, showing a photograph. We need to ensure you're not easily recognizable." An hour later, Zara stood before the mirror in her room, hardly recognizing herself. Martha had helped her cut her long, dark hair to just below her ears, a startlingly modern style that transformed her appearance. With a simple straw hat and the plain dress, she looked like a completely different woman from the elegantly coiffed companion Victor had paraded at his side. "It suits you," Blake said from the doorway, admiration evident in his voice. "Brings out your eyes." Zara touched the shorn ends of her hair, still getting used to the lightness, the freedom of it. "Do you really think this will be enough?" "Combined with staying out of town as much as possible, yes," Blake replied. "Most people see what they expect to see. No one will be looking for a ranch hand's wife with short hair." Wife. The word hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly yet both aware of its implications. Samuel drove them out to the Mackenzie Ranch that afternoon in his wagon, taking back roads to avoid being seen in town. The ranch itself was modest, but well-maintained, a sturdy main house, barn, corral, and bunkhouse, with cattle grazing on the surrounding grassland and a small creek running through the property. Ellen Mackenzie proved to be exactly as Martha had described her, a tall, lean woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She greeted Samuel warmly, then assessed Blake and Zara with shrewd appraisal. "So you're the couple Sam thinks might be right for my place," she said without preamble. "He tells me you're in some trouble running from someone back east." Blake stepped forward. "Yes, madam, but the trouble won't follow us here if we're careful," Mrs. Mackenzie snorted. "Trouble has a way of finding everyone eventually, young man. Question is, are you the kind who faces it head-on or runs from it?" "I've done my share of both," Blake admitted, "but I'm tired of running." The older woman nodded, seeming satisfied with his honesty. "And you, girl? What skills do you bring to a working ranch?" Zara straightened her shoulders. "I can learn whatever needs to be done. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'm a quick study." Mrs. Mackenzie studied her a moment longer, then turned abruptly. "Come inside, both of you. We'll discuss terms over coffee." By sunset, it was settled. Blake and Zara would move into the small foreman's cabin on the ranch, working for room, board, and a modest wage. Blake would handle the cattle and general ranch work, while Zara would assist with household management, the kitchen garden, and the small flock of chickens. If the arrangement proved satisfactory after 6 months, they would discuss more permanent terms, including the possibility of eventually purchasing the ranch when Mrs. Mackenzie was ready to join her daughter in St. Louis. "One more thing," the older woman said as they prepared to leave. "I don't abide unmarried couples living under my roof. If you're not already wed, you need to be before you move in. Sam can arrange it with the preacher in town." Zara felt her cheeks flush, avoiding Blake's gaze. They hadn't discussed marriage, despite the growing feelings between them. Everything had happened so quickly, from her escape to their arrival in Aurora. "We'll take care of it, madam," Blake assured Mrs. Mackenzie smoothly. On the ride back to town, seated beside Blake in the back of Samuel's wagon, Zara finally broached the subject. "You don't have to marry me," she said softly so Samuel couldn't overhear. "We could find another solution." Blake turned to look at her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Is that what you want, another solution?" "No," she admitted. "But I don't want you to feel obligated because of Mrs. Mackenzie's condition or because you promised to protect me." Blake took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Zara Whitley, nothing about my feelings for you comes from obligation. I would marry you tomorrow or 10 years from now, whatever you choose, but only if it's truly your wish." The simple sincerity of his declaration brought tears to her eyes. After 2 years of having no choices, no agency in her own life, here was a man offering her the most important decision of all freely, without pressure or expectation. "Yes," she whispered. "I choose you, Blake Winters, today and every day hereafter." His smile, rare and radiant, was answer enough. As the wagon rattled back toward town in the gathering dusk, Zara leaned her head against Blake's shoulder, a sense of peace settling over her despite the dangers that still lurked. They were married 2 days later in a private ceremony in the Jenkinses' parlor. Martha had altered one of her daughter's old dresses for Zara, a simple gown of cream-colored muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs. In lieu of flowers, she carried a small bouquet of sage and wildflowers that Samuel had gathered from the prairie. The ceremony was brief, with only the Jenkinses and the minister present as witnesses. But as Blake slipped a simple gold band onto her finger purchased from the jeweler down the street with some of the money she'd taken from Victor, Zara felt a profound sense of rightness. This was no transaction, no ownership, but a union of equals, freely chosen. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Blake's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a pledge of all the days to come, of a life built together on their own terms. That evening, after a celebratory dinner at the Jenkinses, they moved to the foreman's cabin at the Mackenzie Ranch. It was small but sound, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, a porch that caught the evening breeze, and windows that looked out over rolling grassland to the mountains beyond. "It's not much," Blake said as they stood on the porch watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. "But it's ours. It's perfect," Zara replied, and meant it. After the opulence of Victor's mansion, with its gilded cages and suffocating luxury, the simple honesty of the cabin felt like true wealth. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other with tender reverence. Blake's touch was nothing like Victor's demanding, possessive handling. Where Victor had taken, Blake gave. Where Victor had demanded, Blake asked. It was a revelation to Zara that physical love could be gentle, mutual, a conversation rather than a monologue. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight silvered the cabin, Zara felt truly free for the first time in her adult life. The specter of Victor still loomed somewhere in the distance, but in this moment, in this place, she belonged to herself and to the man she had chosen. "What are you thinking?" Blake asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I never knew it could be like this," she answered honestly. "That I could feel so whole." Blake's arms tightened around her. "This is how it should be, Zara, always, between equals with respect and care." He kissed her temple. "I will spend my life making sure you never forget that." Days became weeks as they settled into life at the Mackenzie Ranch. The work was hard, as Blake had warned: early mornings feeding animals, long days mending fences or tending the garden, evenings of bone-deep weariness. But it was good work, satisfying in a way Zara had never experienced, and it was theirs. Mrs. Mackenzie proved to be a demanding but fair employer and a fount of practical knowledge. She taught Zara everything from how to make butter and cheese to how to deliver a calf, treating her not as a delicate lady, but as a capable woman with much to learn and much to offer. Blake thrived in the outdoor work, his natural affinity with horses and cattle making him valuable to the ranch. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, discussing the day's events and making plans for the future, perhaps expanding the cattle herd or adding more chickens to the flock. Simple dreams, but their own. They were careful when they went into town, which was rarely. Zara kept her hair short and wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. Blake made most of the necessary trips for supplies, leaving Zara at the ranch where she was less likely to be recognized. But as autumn deepened into winter, they began to hope that perhaps Victor had given up the search. No more strangers had been seen in Aurora asking questions. No more telegrams had arrived with descriptions of a missing woman. "Perhaps he's found someone else to control," Zara suggested one evening as they sat by the fire, snow falling softly outside. "Another unfortunate girl to replace me." Blake frowned at the thought. "I hope not. No one deserves what you endured." She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Do you think we'll ever truly be free of him, or will we always be looking over our shoulders?" "Men like Blackstone don't give up easily," Blake said after a moment. "Their pride won't allow it, but they also move on to new obsessions eventually." He kissed the top of her head. "One day you'll wake up and realize you haven't thought of him in weeks." Zara wanted to believe it was possible that someday Victor would be nothing but a distant, unpleasant memory, with no power to affect her present or her future. For Christmas, their first as husband and wife, Blake surprised her with a gift that brought tears to her eyes: a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face, gentle-natured but spirited. "She's nothing like Ember," he said as Zara stroked the mare's velvety nose. "But I thought perhaps you were ready for a new companion." "She's perfect," Zara whispered, overcome with emotion at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "What's her name?" "That's for you to decide." Zara studied the mare's intelligent eyes, the proud way she held her head. "Phoenix," she decided. Rising from the ashes, Blake's smile held understanding. "Phoenix it is." Winter gave way to spring, the harsh Wyoming landscape softening with new growth. The cattle had survived the cold months well, and the first calves of the season were being born, keeping Blake busy day and night. Zara's kitchen garden was planted, the chickens were laying prolifically, and she had even begun helping Mrs. Mackenzie with the ranch accounts, putting to use the education her father had insisted upon despite social conventions. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt not just safe, but fulfilling. Zara no longer started at every unexpected sound, no longer scanned the horizon constantly for pursuers. And if she occasionally woke from nightmares of Victor finding her, Blake was always there to hold her until the terror passed. It was early May when the telegram arrived. Samuel Jenkins rode out to the ranch himself to deliver it, his expression grave. "This came for you today," he said, handing the yellow paper to Blake. "Thought you should see it right away." Blake read it quickly, his face hardening. "When did this come in?" "This morning." "What is it, Blake?" Instead of answering, Blake passed the telegram to Zara. Her hands trembled as she read the brief message. "Blackstone arriving Aurora, stop traveling with 3 men, stop asking for Blake Winters, stop use caution, stop Marshall Denver, how did he find us?" Zara whispered, fear clawing at her throat. All these months of safety, of building a new life, and now the past had caught up with them after all. "Doesn't matter how," Blake said grimly. "What matters is what we do now." Mrs. Mackenzie, who had joined them on the porch, spoke up. "You run, both of you. Take fresh horses and supplies and go tonight." Blake shook his head. "Running didn't solve this before, it won't now. Blackstone will just keep coming, keep searching." He turned to Zara, his expression softening. "Unless you want to go." Say the word, and we'll leave everything behind, start fresh somewhere else." Zara looked around at the ranch that had become their home, the cabin they had made their own, the garden she had planted with her own hands, Phoenix grazing contentedly in the nearby corral. All of it hard-won, built with honest labor and shared dreams. "No," she said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "I'm done running from Victor Blackstone. This is our home now. I won't let him take it from us." Blake studied her face, seeming to search for any doubt or fear. Finding only resolve, he nodded. "Then we face him, together." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Samuel rode back to town to alert the sheriff, though Blake had little faith in official protection against a man of Blackstone's wealth and influence. Mrs. Mackenzie dispatched one of the ranch hands to gather the other local ranchers, men who respected Blake and would stand with him if needed. That evening, as they sat at their kitchen table cleaning weapons and making plans, Blake reached across to take Zara's hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said quietly, "know that these months with you have been the happiest of my life." Zara squeezed his hand. "We've only just begun, Blake Winters. Victor won't take our future from us. I won't allow it." The determination in her voice made him smile, a fierce pride in his eyes. "No, he won't," Blake agreed. "No one will own you again, Zara, not while I draw breath." "Not while either of us draws breath," she corrected. "We face this together as equals, as equals." The words echoed in her mind as they prepared for bed, knowing sleep would be elusive but needing the rest nonetheless. How far she had come from the terrified woman fleeing through the wilderness. She was still afraid only a fool wouldn't be, but the fear no longer controlled her. Dawn broke clear and cool, the sky a perfect Wyoming blue that belied the tension gripping the ranch. Blake and Zara dressed silently, each lost in their own thoughts. When they stepped onto the porch, they found Mrs. Mackenzie already there, a shotgun across her knees. "They're coming," she said simply, nodding toward the road. In the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of riders, 4 of them, moving at a steady pace toward the ranch. Beside them, 3 of the neighboring ranchers had arrived, grim-faced men with rifles who nodded respectfully to Blake and Zara. "You don't have to be part of this," Blake told them. "Blackstone's quarrel is with us, not you." The oldest of the men, a weathered rancher named Hardin, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Way I see it, when a man comes after one of our own, he comes after all of us. That's how we survive out here." Blake nodded, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Thank you." As the riders drew closer, Zara could make out details, 3 rough-looking men who were clearly hired guns, and at their center, a figure she would have recognized anywhere. Victor Blackstone sat tall in the saddle, impeccably dressed as always in a fine suit and hat despite the dust of travel. Even at a distance, she could see the arrogant set of his shoulders, the proprietary way he surveyed the ranch as if already calculating its value. Blake moved to stand beside her on the porch, not in front of her as if to shield her, but shoulder to shoulder. "Partners. Equals. Ready." He asked quietly. Zara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Ready." The riders halted about 20 yards from the house, taking in the assembled defenders with calculating eyes. Victor's gaze found Zara immediately, his expression hardening at the sight of her standing freely beside Blake. "Zara," he called, his voice carrying across the yard with the same commanding tone she remembered all too well. "I've come to take you home." Blake's hand found hers, a gentle squeeze of reassurance, but it was Zara who stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am home, Victor." Anger flashed across Blackstone's face, quickly masked by a condescending smile. "Now, Zara, you know that isn't true. Your place is with me in Silverton. I've been very patient, but it's time to end this foolishness." "The only foolishness was ever believing you owned me," Zara replied. "I'm not your property, Victor. I never was." Victor's smile thinned. "You signed a contract, my dear. Your father's debts became yours, and you agreed to my guardianship." His gaze shifted to Blake. "This man has taken what belongs to me. I want her returned, and I want compensation for the money and jewelry she stole when she fled." Blake stepped forward, his stance casual but alert. "Mr. Blackstone, let me be clear. Zara is my wife now, legally and in the eyes of God. She belongs to no one but herself. Whatever arrangement you believe existed before is null and void. Wife, Victor spat the word like a curse. You think a hasty frontier wedding negates a legal contract? I have papers, sir, binding agreements that this woman willfully violated. Coerced agreements aren't binding, Blake countered. And as for the money, consider it compensation for 2 years of unpaid service. Victor's face flushed with anger. You think this is a negotiation? I've traveled hundreds of miles to reclaim what's mine. I won't leave empty-handed. One of his hired guns shifted in his saddle, hand dropping casually toward his holster. The tension in the air thickened, everyone acutely aware of how quickly words could give way to violence. Zara took another step forward, ignoring Blake's concerned glance. She needed to face Victor directly to end this on her terms. Let me ask you something, Victor, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. How many men did you hire to find me? How much money have you spent these past months? All for what? A woman who despises the very sight of you. Victor's expression darkened. This isn't about you, Zara. It's about what's right, what's mine. No, she corrected. It's about your pride, your need to control, to own. She gestured to the ranch around them. Look at what I've built here, a real life. A marriage based on respect and choice, not ownership and fear. You never saw me as a person, Victor. Just a possession to be displayed and controlled. Something shifted in Victor's eyes, not softening, but a cold calculation replacing the hot anger. And what if I told you I have the deed to this very ranch in my pocket? Beside her, Blake tensed. Mrs. Mackenzie made a small sound of surprise. What are you talking about? Blake demanded. Victor smiled, clearly pleased by their reaction. It seems the bank holding Mrs. Mackenzie's mortgage was experiencing some financial difficulties. I was able to acquire it at a very reasonable price. He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. This ranch now belongs to me, which means you're all trespassing on my property, Mrs. Mackenzie rose from her chair, shotgun in hand. That's a lie. My mortgage is with the Aurora Bank, and it's in good standing. Was with the Aurora Bank, Victor corrected smoothly. Banking is a volatile business these days. Ownerships change, and debts must be paid. It was a devastating blow, one Zara hadn't anticipated. Victor had found a way to attack not just her, but everything and everyone she cared about. Even if what you say is true, Blake said carefully, there are legal processes. You can't simply evict established residents without due notice. Perhaps not, Victor conceded, but I can begin proceedings immediately, and in the meantime I can ensure that life becomes very uncomfortable for anyone harboring my property. His gaze settled on Zara again. It would be much simpler for everyone if you simply came with me now, Zara. Save your friends here a great deal of trouble. It was blackmail, pure and simple. Zara felt sick at the familiar tactics Victor using money and influence to manipulate, to control, to get what he wanted regardless of the cost to others. But something had changed in Zara since she had fled Silverton. The frightened girl who had run from Victor's house with only the clothes on her back was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced death, who had built a new life with her own hands, who knew what it meant to be truly valued. No, she said, the words simple but absolute. Victor's expression hardened. I don't think you understand the situation. I understand perfectly, Zara interrupted. You're trying to use these people, this place, to force my compliance. It's what you've always done. Victor used money to buy what can't be freely given. She stepped closer, her voice dropping so that only he could hear her next words. But I know something about you that all your money can't erase. And what might that be? He sneered. The truth about Robert Franklin's death, Zara replied quietly. I overheard you that night, talking with Judge Pierce, about how Franklin was going to expose your business dealings with the mining company. How convenient that he had that accident at the Silver Queen mine. Victor's face drained of color. You're lying, he hissed. You have no proof. Perhaps not, Zara conceded. But rumors are powerful things, especially when they come from someone who lived in your house for 2 years, who saw your papers, overheard your conversations. She met his gaze steadily. How much is your reputation worth, Victor? Your freedom? Because if you persist in this, I will tell everything I know to anyone who will listen: newspapers, territorial officials, business associates. For the first time since she had known him, Victor Blackstone looked uncertain, calculating the potential damage against the satisfaction of reclaiming her. Here's what's going to happen, Zara continued, her voice still low but unwavering. You're going to tear up whatever document you claim to have for this ranch. You're going to get back on your horse and ride away, and you're never going to come looking for me again. Or what? Victor challenged, though with less conviction than before, or I start talking to everyone. About everything. She held his gaze. You taught me well, Victor. I was watching and listening for 2 years while you thought I was just an ornament. I know where the bodies are buried, figuratively and perhaps literally. For a long moment, Victor stared at her, rage and calculation warring in his eyes. Then, with deliberate movements, he tore the document in his hand into pieces, letting them flutter to the ground. You're not worth the trouble, he said coldly. Keep your miserable ranch. Keep your common cowboy husband. You'll regret choosing this life over what I offered you. Zara smiled then, feeling truly free at last. The only thing I regret, Victor, is not leaving sooner. With a final glare of impotent fury, Victor wheeled his horse around. We're done here, he snapped to his hired guns, who exchanged confused glances but followed as he galloped away from the ranch, dust billowing behind them. Silence fell as they watched the retreating figures. Then Blake was beside her, his arm slipping around her waist. What did you say to him? He asked in wonder. Zara leaned into his embrace, suddenly exhausted by the confrontation. The truth, she replied, that he never really owned me and now he never will. Mrs. Mackenzie approached, picking up one of the torn pieces of paper from the ground. This isn't even a proper deed, she observed with a snort. Just some fancy-looking document he must have had drawn up to bluff us. Zara wasn't surprised. Victor had always been adept at bluffing, at creating the impression of power where none actually existed. The neighboring ranchers congratulated Blake and Zara on standing their ground, promising to keep an eye out in case Blackstone changed his mind and returned. But something told Zara he wouldn't. Men like Victor valued their reputations, their standing in society above all else. The threat of exposure would keep him away far more effectively than any physical confrontation. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Blake took Zara's hand in his. You were magnificent today, he said softly. Standing up to him like that, Zara smiled. I had a good teacher, someone who showed me what real strength looks like. Blake shook his head. That strength was always in you, Zara. You just needed the freedom to find it. She leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Do you think he's really gone for good? Yes, Blake said with conviction. Men like Blackstone cut their losses when the game turns against them. He'll find some other way to restore his pride, someone else to control. He pressed a kiss to her temple. But not you, never again you. Zara closed her eyes, savoring the simple peace of the moment. The future stretched before them, unknown but full of possibility, a ranch of their own someday, perhaps children, a life built on mutual respect and freely given love. It was more than she had dared hope for when she fled Silverton all those months ago. No one will own me again, she whispered, echoing Blake's promise from their first meeting. Except perhaps my own heart, and that belongs to you, freely given. Blake's arms tightened around her, his voice rough with emotion. And mine to you, Zara Winters. From the first moment I saw you, and for all the days to come. Together they watched night fall over the ranch, their home, their sanctuary, the place where a woman who had once been owned had found true freedom in the arms of a man who had taught her the meaning of choice. And in the years that followed, as the Mackenzie Ranch became the Winters Ranch, as their family grew with the addition of first a son and then twin daughters, as Aurora expanded from a small settlement to a proper town, Zara never forgot the lesson of those early days that freedom was not just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice. The choice to love, to build, to become. No one would own her again. Not Victor Blackstone, not circumstances, not fear. In choosing Blake, in choosing herself, Zara had claimed a freedom more profound than mere escape. She had claimed her right to write her own story, to love on her own terms, to belong without being possessed. It was all any of them could ask of this wild, beautiful life: to be seen, to be valued, to be free.